I want to take this opportunity to talk to you about the companies that are struggling to get an ROI from their podcast. So here's the thing: you can have the best, most professionally produced podcast with the most amazing creative and voiceovers and host, and most importantly, content created for your audience. But if there's a disconnect between your podcast and your team, then you are going to struggle with getting an ROI. And here's what I mean by that. When we do podcast audits, we often get a lot of feedback in terms of, I really need to grow my show. I feel like it's stagnant, that it's not happening the way that I thought it was going to happen, and it's very expensive to get it produced. Or even if it's not about the expense of getting produced, it's just about the flat out investment of time and resources and allocation of team going towards the podcast and just not seeing it grow. Well, what we've discovered in almost every instance, that there are typically three common things that are happening behind the scenes. And one is that there's not an established communication amongst teams about the benefits of the podcast. Marketing is not talking to social media, that's not talking to the business development team. And so this amazing podcast is being created, but marketing doesn't know how to bring it into their editorial content strategy, and social doesn't know how to layer it into their already existing social media calendar. And they quite honestly just haven't had the dots connected for them by someone on the team that can really help them understand the benefit of really marketing that podcast outside of just the host who's creating that content. The second thing that we see is that there's no tangible direction being given in terms of the goals for the podcast. So there's either a disagreement amongst teams or the people that are involved in the production of the podcast and distribution of the podcast, or in some cases, no conversation at all about what are the goals of the podcast. Are you using the podcast as a business development tool so that you're not necessarily looking at wanting to aspire to have huge hundreds and thousands of downloads, but really optimizing the amount of downloads that you have? We use the phrase picking up gold from your backyard. You can have a really strong ROI from a podcast that gets less than 1,000 downloads an episode if your call to action is integrated correctly and very clear and concise, and that customer journey is captured, and you're able to continue that conversation once the audience has engaged with your podcast content. Make sure there's a really good work process and flow on the then what, so that they can connect back to you and do business with you. And then the third thing is usually just a lack of understanding about how to market and grow the show. We see a lot of things where the episode release, for example, it just stays like in a Google Drive somewhere, and either maybe it gets posted about one time, but the content is not being used or repurposed in ways that can really be advantageous to growing the show, like creating reels and audiograms, and even the utilization of SEO optimized show notes to grow and increase traffic on the website and to your YouTube channel. There's so many things that a podcast can do for you if it's marketed appropriately outside of just the day that it's released. You can take fan favorite episodes and re-release them and remarket them. They're really infinite possibilities. You can create educational series that then become part of a resource library for your company or your business. But all of these things require really strong internal communications with your team. So take it from a company who is an award-winning podcast production company. We build beautiful podcasts, but that's not where the job ends. What happens after that beautifully produced and well-executed podcast is out into the world needs to have its own recipe for success. So let us know if this is something that you want to dig into more. It's something we love to talk about, and we have a team of experts that are on standby to help you get the ROI that you're looking for for your podcast growth strategy.